Welcome, everybody, to the Fantasy Roundup for Tuesday, January the 4th. Zach Ewing along with Spencer, the Guru Urquhart. We are here to wrap up 2021 fantasy football. Maybe help you out a little bit if you have one of those weird leagues where you've got a Week 18 championship. I know there's not too many of them out there, but just maybe. And then we're actually going to look ahead at the 2022 fantasy football season and just take the very first way too early look ahead at that. As we go forward here on the Fantasy Roundup. And then Fantasy Roundup going forward, it will not be a weekly show, but we're going to do a little basketball. And then once we get closer to baseball season, we'll be doing some baseball draft prep. And really, Spencer, as we talk about that, you've almost got to wait for all the free agency stuff. And that means you've got to wait for the lockout to end before you can really do a lot of baseball draft prep.
Oh, man, yeah, that's going to be a mess, Zach. I hope it gets resolved soon because else we're going to have to be talking football off season because that never stops. And then basketball, too. Basketball's been such a mess, man. I'm getting so frustrated with our league. Half my team's got COVID.
I know. It's a mess. I started 8-1. I thought I had a real good team, and then like everybody's got COVID, so I've lost 2 in a row. But you and I this week tangling again, so I got to get revenge for you were my only loss in the first 9 weeks, so we'll see what happens. But basketball is a mess right now, and just as we say on all of these shows, let's just hope the COVID situation goes away quickly. It is an absolute mess. Let's just hope it goes away quickly. Hey, we're brought to you by Caesar Sportsbook here on the Fantasy Roundup on bet.nola.com. We'd like to remind you that you can sign up for the Caesar Sportsbook, expected to go live mobile later this month. You can get a $100 free bet bonus by going to nola.com/Caesars. You do that before launch. You deposit before launch. You get the $100 bonus. And then also the week of launch, Caesars is planning another bonus for all NOLA.com users where depending on who's playing, if it's a Saints playoff week or Pelicans or LSU basketball, whoever it might be, you get an extra $1 for every point a couple of local teams score that week. So real cool deal. Sign up for it, NOLA.com/Caesars, and you will be ready to go later this month when it goes live. So, Spencer, you're in 13 leagues in fantasy football. Let's do a final tally. You're the guru. You've got to have won at least a couple of those, right?
Yeah, luckily 1-2. I had a rough week 16. I was in 6 semifinals, but only made it in 2. But then I had a huge week 17 this week. Basically, if I'd have been in all those finals, I think I'd have won at least 5 of the 6 if I'd have made it in all of them. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. A little too little, too late in those. But at least I won the 2 I was in, not complaining, considering just how wacky this year was. Congrats to all those who did pull off their titles, because if you did, you had to have been a trooper battling through all the craziness.
Yeah, it was not an easy fantasy season, probably even more difficult than 2020 in a lot of ways, because in 2020, if they had outbreaks, they were just postponing games, and it was wacky, but you weren't necessarily losing the players like you did this year. And so my 2 big money leagues, I won one of them. The other one, I got eliminated back in the quarters. The one I won, I was just like you, went totally off in, had Jamar Chase, 55.6 points. And then I actually won by 61, so I didn't even technically need him. But he made my Sunday very comfortable, very enjoyable, took my son to the Saints game. And every time I checked my phone, it was just a little bit better. So it's a good feeling to win that title, to bring it home. So let's take a look at that Week 17. Who got it done for us? We'll start with the quarterbacks. Top scoring quarterback for the second straight week was Joe Burrow, by a full 7 points. Little late season renaissance for Russell Wilson. And then just the rest of the list, real familiar names, Spencer.
Right. Yeah, Burrow is really the big surprise, because but prior to these past couple of weeks, he was having a nice year, but now he's having an elite year. He's been a top-end QB1. He's been the QB1 these past couple of weeks. And Russ, a little surprising, too. Wasn't expecting him to be in the top 5, although he did have a cupcake matchup against Detroit. So, it's good to see him perform well, showing that he's not washed up. He still has some good production left in the tank. And then Brady, Dak, and Kyler, all the usual suspects there. They've appeared plenty of times in the top 5. No Herbert, no Mahomes, but, still a pretty straightforward group.
Yeah, to your point, Joe Burrow finished as the number 6 quarterback this year and he was down in the teens for the first half of the year. So he really came on strong. The top 5 for the year, by the way, in terms of total points, were Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, and Aaron Rodgers. And Burrow was 6th. So yeah, just really tremendous season for him, second half of the season especially. Moving on to running backs, Rashad Penny of the Seahawks. It was just a big fantasy day in that game, period. We had several Seahawks going off. Also, Amon-Ra St. Brown, we'll talk about for the Lions, went off. Najee Harris, a big Monday night for the Steelers. And boy, you want to talk about fantasy moments. I don't personally know anybody, but I guarantee you there were plenty of matchups. Drop a comment if your fantasy championship in your league was decided by that 37-yard touchdown run by Najee Harris that the Steelers didn't even really need with a minute and a half last night.
Yeah, they were thinking, maybe he'll just go down and they'll let Ben throw it in since it's his last home game. But nah, Najee wanted that. He had green grass. He took it, ran with it. And yeah, I had him on one of my championship teams, so I wasn't complaining. I was like, I didn't really need it either, but I was just like, whatever. Give him more production. It just he deserves it. But it is
run
weird.
It up, baby, run it up.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of weird seeing this list because he's the only familiar name on it. Rashad Penny. We've talked about him a lot in recent weeks, especially on the waiver wire segment. But for him to be the top scoring running back this week is quite surprising, even with the good matchup. I didn't expect Penny to be able to hold up to put together a week like this. He's been so injury prone, but he's finally showing that he can stay healthy. And when he is healthy, he's pretty productive. And then Darrell filling in for Clyde, Boston Scott filling in for Miles Sanders, and then Devin Singletary. Been impressed with him in recent weeks. Finally, looks like he's taken over as the workhorse there in Buffalo. It's about time. They've been lacking a workhorse now for over a year, it seems like.
I know a couple of local guys there to shout out. Darrell Williams from LSU and Boston Scott from Zachary High School getting it done. Pretty cool to see those guys up there. Your top 5 running backs for the season in fantasy in terms of total points. Of course, Jonathan Taylor was number 1, Austin Eckler number 2, Najee Harris comes in 3rd, then Joe Mixon, and how about Leonard Fournette at number 5, even though he missed the last couple of weeks. So another LSU guy, and really just goes to show you, we talked about this a little bit last week, but that 0 RB strategy, if you draft the right guy, he'll pay off. If you drafted Najee Harris or Austin Eckler or obviously Jonathan Taylor, he paid off. Joe Mixon paid off. But, Leonard Fournette was number 5. Cordero Patterson was number 7. You go down the list a little bit. Javonte Williams was like number 15. Damian Harris, number 17. Darrell Williams, 18. So there were a lot of guys who you could have gotten real late in drafts and would have gotten you starter-level production.
Right, yeah, and that was probably a league-winning strategy for a lot of people, considering how many of the first-round running backs didn't live up to the hype. CMC and Henry get hurt, and then guys like Kamara, Dalvin Cook just don't really. They just Saquon, Zeke. They just didn't get it done, man. Just didn't live up to the hype. So yeah, it was a weird year for sure, and just it goes to show that. Yeah, you can just see it. I don't know. I can just tell you that don't if you have a quote unquote bad draft, like if the fantasy whatever guys tell you that your draft sucked, don't take that to heart. Just keep your waiver wires in. Keep up with your waiver wires, make trades, and you'll be okay.
Honestly, the league that I won this year was the one where the draft came in the middle of the hurricane. I had no power, and I had preset the order because I had a feeling that I might lose power. And so I had preset my draft order. But that, as you know, that only works to a certain extent. Like you might get guys that you really like. I got Jamar Chase, for instance, because I put him a full round higher than where he was ranked. And so I ended up with him, and that obviously worked out well. But like 6 of my first 7 picks were wide receivers, which doesn't always work out real well. But anyway, long story short, yeah, what you feel on draft day is not always the way it works out. In my other league, I thought I had a really good draft, and I ended up having a pretty good team. I was the 4th best team in the league, but I got bounced in the quarterfinals, and that was all she wrote. So it does not always matter. By the way, Spencer, you talk about Zeke. I'm going to spring this question on you. Where do you think Ezekiel Elliott landed in terms of total points for running backs? Like what number running back was he total points PPR?
Yeah, he actually ended up, he stayed healthy and had a fairly decent stretch run. So I think he ended up right around sixth in
He was
points.
sixth. Yeah, that's right. And so he actually was not a disaster, even though there were some frustrating weeks, including this last one for Elliott owners. I mean, you can't be unhappy with drafting him as like the number 7 overall running back when he finished number 6. So obviously there's always better picks to be made, but
Jonathan
he wasn't the
Taylor.
worst. Yeah, Jonathan Taylor would have been being one, Austin Eckler being another. Top scoring wide receivers for week 17. I'll bet you could have guessed who was number 1 on that list. He was the top scoring player in any week this year, 55.6 points, 266 yards, 3 touchdowns, just going total beast mode. Another LSU guy in Ja'Marr Chase.
Right, yeah, basically lapped the field this week, had him in one of my championship matchups, and made the day a lot easier. Like you say, you could, breathe easy if you had him, because you pretty much had it won unless your opponent had Burrow. That'd be the only way you wouldn't be comfortable probably. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown, what a stretch run he's had. Incredible production there. Picked him up in some leagues. Unfortunately, couldn't even use him in one because I was eliminated. But I mean, it still was cool to see him produce. I actually picked him up in my keeper league. I have him in my keeper league where you keep 6 players. I'm thinking he's going to be one of my 6 keepers because I had Calvin Ridley in that league. But considering how uncertain his situation is and just how awful the Falcons' offense looks right now, I'm thinking about keeping Amon-Ra next year.
And Devontae Adams, just solid. He just torches the Vikings throughout his career. 30 points for him as well. And then Braxton Berrios of the Jets. I don't think, I mean, he won you leagues if you picked him up, but I don't know what kind of league you'd have to be in where a championship level team's picking up Braxton Berrios. But he scored 25 points. He's certainly a DFS legend.
Right. Yeah, maybe some super deep league. Because, I mean, there was some logic behind that because Elijah Moore wasn't quite ready. Crowder banged up Davis. I mean, someone has to catch passes there, and it was going to be a game script in which they'd be playing from behind. So I could see someone picking him up in a deep league or DFS. Big ups to those who did because he went off.
Yeah, a comment from Larry here on Facebook. Matt Corral, what round you think? And that's an interesting question, Larry. We will get to the end of the show towards some 2022 discussion and some favorite rookies coming in. As far the big question with Corral, apparently he's healthier than we thought after the Sugar Bowl. I personally think he's going to be the best rookie quarterback in next year's class, but I also don't think it's a very good class. So as far as fantasy goes, it completely depends on where he lands. There are some places he wouldn't even start. There are other places where he's probably one of the top 10 quarterbacks off the board just because of running ability. So we'll see on that, but we will talk some rookies later on in the show. Let's talk top scoring wide receivers for the season. And again, this is not average, so this has to do with did you stay healthy too. Number 1 with a bullet was Cooper Kupp. Number 2, Devontae Adams, didn't disappoint anybody. Number 3, Deebo Samuel. Number 4, Justin Jefferson. And pulling into the number 5 spot with an even Steven 300 points in PPR was Ja'Marr Chase. He got more than a sixth of them in that last week. But that's how you like to do it. We like production in the playoffs. So he passed Tyreek Hill at the last minute for number 5 on that list.
Yeah, you love to see it, man. Justin Jefferson made it too, so 2 LSU products up in there. Yeah, and then Deebo, a huge surprise. I think he was even a bigger surprise than Chase because, I mean, we knew Chase and Burrow had that great connection where Deebo, a lot of people pegged Ayuk as the top guy there. And, I mean, Ayuk just kind of fizzled out and Deebo went off as a result.
Yeah, no, that's a great call. Top scoring tight ends in week 17. We are, by the way, going to talk our biggest surprises here in a minute of the season. This was a bad week for tight ends. Only guy over 20 was Noah Fant. Probably wasn't started in most leagues, certainly not in championship games. Gronk had a good week for Tampa Bay. Mark Andrews was solid, but not where he has been. Same with Kelsey, and then Dallas Goedert rounding out the top 5 here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty straightforward. Noah Fant, like, where did you come from, Noah? He had been hiding all year, and then he delivers a big week 17. So yeah, he probably had him benched, but yeah, he came through for those that took a chance. And then Mark Andrews has just been so good, so consistent. Even with these backup quarterbacks, he still managed to be a top 5 tight end. And I said it last week. I'll say it again. I'm thinking he will be the number 1 overall tight end off the board next year.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about that last week, and I don't think that's a bad call because if you look at top scoring tight ends for the season in total points, Mark Andrews, number 1 with 284. A big drop off to Travis Kelce at 249, and then an even bigger drop off to number 3, which is George Kittle. Of course, he had a month where he was unstoppable, but he also wasn't healthy all year long. Dalton Schultz of the Cowboys was number 4, and then Kyle Pitts, the rookie from Atlanta, edges out Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert to be number 5.
Yeah, really surprised about Schultz. Just, coming in, he was just, he had an okay year last year, but not someone anyone was targeting. With Blake Jarwin was back, but Schultz proved to be the not only the top tight end on Dallas, also a really reliable fantasy option there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk our MVPs. First for Week 17, then we have season-long MVPs. I got to say, Spencer, I'll let you go first on these things. You take all the good ones, man. So I'm always left getting somebody else. There was really only one MVP for Week 17 in fantasy football, and it was Mr. Ja'Marr Chase.
Yeah, I mean, he just he can't go with. I mean, Burrow. I mean, you can maybe say it, but I mean, Chase just. I mean, from the PPR perspective, just. I mean, you can't get any better than that. I mean, it's just for an NFL receiver to deliver that kind of game. It's just stuff that you just don't see that. I mean, it's insane. I mean, the kind of season Cooper Kupp put up and then the kind of week Ja'Marr Chase put up. I mean, it's just this receiver production it's just getting out of control, man, and in a good way as far as like these guys they're going to be some guys eventually pushing, Megatron's single season record and Jerry Rice's career records potentially if they can stay healthy. I mean, this is air raid. The air raid is in full effect. There's no doubt.
Spencer, how close do you think we are to seeing wide receivers drafted more often in the top 5 of fantasy football drafts?
Oh, I think it's coming next year. I could see Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams going in the top 5 next year, especially considering the running backs struggled big time this year. I mentioned that in my column today about how just, I could see that for sure being a shift, especially for PPR leagues.
Yeah, and I mean, the issue, too, is running backs get hurt more often. They just do. Mm-hmm. These receivers are sticking around. They're playing 16, 17 weeks, and so you can count on that production to be there all year long. I took Devontae Adams in the first round of both of my leagues and was real happy with it. I mean, he obviously wasn't Cooper Kupp, but he was the next best thing, and you could just count on him every single week. My Week 17 MVP, another wide receiver, and it's Amon-Ra St. Brown, and, was he Ja'Marr Chase? No, but if you had Amon-Ra St. Brown, either in DFS you probably cashed, and if not, it probably was, if you could pair him with a DK Metcalf, a Devontae Adams, a Cooper Kupp, he obviously is not going to be your number 1 wide receiver. He probably won you that championship because unless you were facing Chase, or even if you were, maybe this 35 points was 5 points better than anybody else scored. And it's also, like you said, his 3rd straight week over 23.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's amazing how these rookies have done. That's another takeaway. I have just these rookies. This rookie class was just off the charts, especially the skill guys. I know the quarterbacks didn't really deliver. Man, the skill guys, the running backs, receivers are just, even the tight ends some weeks with Pitts and Freiermuth. It was just incredible to watch. And yeah, Amon-Ra stretch run. Straight fire.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But nobody was as fire all year long as your fantasy MVP. You drafted this guy. You were almost undoubtedly in the playoffs. Didn't have a huge playoff run, but he was solid for you too, and might have helped win some championships too.
Yeah, I couldn't believe just how consistent Cooper Kupp was this season. I mean, you could bank on the floor normally as a 10-point floor is good, or it was literally a 15-point floor. Like I don't think he had any week under 15 that I can remember. I mean, he averaged 25. I mean, so
he had 111.4. That was back in week 4. And then he followed that up with a 16.2. But that was his second lowest and he only had one other week even under 20. So that's how good he was.
Yeah, it's wild, and it's wild, and he, yeah, I mean, it's in 16 games, really productive year. I thought maybe he could catch Michael Thomas's receptions record or Calvin Johnson's yardage record. I don't think he'll quite get that, but still an amazing year considering he'll likely get the triple crown of receiving categories, leading in receptions, yards, and TDs. So yeah, big ups to Cooper Kupp, man. Definitely a worthy MVP.
Yeah, and one thing about the receiving triple crown, like those categories weren't even close until Jamar Chase caught 3 touchdowns. Now he's only, I think, 2 behind. So if Jamar Chase catches 3 more touchdowns Sunday, Cooper Kupp could get caught for that. But I mean, listen, a tremendous receiver. I personally think Cooper Kupp ought to be getting more like real life MVP love. I don't understand how he's only 6th in the odds. I know a receiver doesn't typically win it, but who's been more valuable than that guy outside of maybe Aaron Rodgers? I mean, he's just been tremendous. And as you said, every single week, you're talking 8 catches, 100 yards, a touchdown, like just every single week he's been there. Every single week also, that's really what it takes to be a fantasy MVP. Derrick Henry was on a historic pace. The first half of the season, he gets hurt, so he's sort of out of the running. So my fantasy MVP for 2021 is the next best thing, and that's Jonathan Taylor. And as you can see, I really had to squeeze these numbers on here. He averaged 22.5 points in a PPR, 20 total touchdowns. I think that was 18 on the ground and 2 receiving. And so you're looking at, again, the record, I think it's 27 is the record by Adrian Peterson, counting receiving and rushing. And so he won't get there. And obviously the 17th game is going to help him if he even gets close. But 1,734 yards rushing on just 317 carries. So just do the math. That's easily over 5 yards a carry. Add in 37 receptions, so a couple receptions a game, getting you points there. He was the top running back, as it turned out, by 45 points throughout the season.
Right. Yeah, it'd have been interesting to see if him and Derrick Henry duke it out for top running back honors. It's almost like when Henry went down, that's when Taylor really blew up. So I think their seasons would have been very similar if Henry could have stayed healthy. But yeah, Taylor definitely a worthy choice, and him and Kupp are neck and neck. I mean, for a full PPR, I mean, it's probably Kupp, but if it was like half PPR standard, probably Taylor with all the touchdowns.
Yeah, no, he's I had a feeling you were going to take Kupp as your MVP, and when that happened, I was like, well, there's one more obvious choice here, and so I went with Jonathan Taylor. Now, MVPs are great, and we talk about them every week here on the Fantasy Roundup, but the thing you really need to win your league in a season long, or really to win any week in DFS, is to pick the sleeper, to pick the surprises. So we went back, we found 4 guys each, one at each position, who are really surprises. And if you drafted them, you probably ended up having a real good draft and a real good season. And again, I'll let Spencer go first. So he took a lot of the good choices, just saying. But yeah, listen, if you drafted any of these guys, you were on it.
Yeah, man, this is wild. Yeah, Debo's ADP there was a little higher than I thought, but still an amazing value. I mean, there's no denying that. And then all these other
he's
ones,
like wide receiver 11 drafted, and he ended up being wide receiver 3. That's all you got to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in a lot of leagues I was in, maybe his ADP was higher down the stretch. Like I got him really late in a lot of in some drafts. I got him like the 8th round in a couple. I was like, wow. I was like, I'll take it. He definitely should have going higher than that. But yeah, the rest of these, Cordero Patterson, Joe Burrow, Dalton Schultz, crazy. That I didn't realize Joe Burrow was that his ADP was that low. He'd have been one if he'd have done the wait on a quarterback strategy. It's generally didn't work out since they didn't have a whole lot of late quarterbacks that did good. But Burrow was definitely the exception for that. If he could have waited and got him, Patterson, and Schultz, and he'd have had some bargain hunting there. They all
oh my goodness, yeah,
extreme returns on investment there. Probably the biggest surprise to me was Patterson, considering how long he's been in the league. Been in the league 9 years. Did not see that coming one bit.
He was the guy who week 1 was the number 1 waiver wire pickup, and if you had the foresight to use a lot of your fab, or if you happen to have a bad first week and you were high up in the waiver wire order, it really paid off to get him. I will say this on the ADPs. these are what ESPN has recorded now, and so I assume that includes some redraft leagues, and that probably pushes up the ADPs higher than they were preseason. So,
okay.
like even Cordero Patterson, probably his ADP of drafts taken preseason was even lower than that. It's
he went
same thing with
undrafted
Debo.
in most of my leagues.
Yeah, same thing with Debo. Obviously, if you're drafted in week 5 or week 6 doing a redraft, you're going to draft him in the top 30, and so that probably moved that way up. Burrow and Schultz probably got drafted in most drafts and were never dropped, and so those guys, that's probably fairly accurate. But the redraft is going to skew this just a little bit. So just sort of the caveat there. Same thing with this. Deontay Johnson was probably drafted even lower than this, 76.8. Ended up being Big Ben's favorite target, especially in a PPR format. The guy was a total target hog, got a ton of receptions. So he was like the number 17 wide receiver drafted and ended up being number 9 in wide receivers. Brady, I'm cheating a little bit because he was the number 6 quarterback. But as you said, there weren't a lot of quarterback sleepers this year. And I think a lot of people shied away from Brady because, hey, he's 44 years old. He's got to drop off. He turned into the number 3 quarterback season again. So if you drafted him, you got value. I don't know if it's a total surprise, but it's certainly value. And then the bottom 2 guys on this list, I think these are probably inflated by redraft numbers too. Leonard Fournette was not a top 100 guy. Everybody, myself included, I wanted no part of that Bucs timeshare. But he took it by the horns and ended up being a top 5 fantasy running back. And then Dawson Knox, even though he was hurt a couple of weeks, ended up as a tight end 1. I think he was the number 9 tight end, and he was not really drafted in most leagues.
Right, yeah, him and Schultz, they were neck and neck probably for the biggest surprise at tight end. And Fournette, I wanted no part of him either, or Brady. I was a little down on the Bucs. I was thinking they might have a Super Bowl hangover, but nope, they did not. They were just as more productive than we had anticipated, actually.
And by the way, just in the interest of being transparent, like if I would have told you to draft Ronald Jones before Leonard Fournette. I didn't want either of them.
Yeah, I didn't want either. I was kind of torn. I think I had Rojo ranked higher, but they were neck and neck in my list.
I mean, it was just too hard to predict. Those timeshares are a mess. But if you ended up with Fournette, boy, you ended up happy at the end of the year. We will look ahead to 2022, by the way, and some guys we're looking at drafting here before we wrap the show up. First, though, I did want to turn my attention quickly to Week 18. You're watching the Fantasy Roundup on bet.nola.com. Week 18. Spencer, you in any leagues with a Week 18 championship round? It's pretty rare these days.
No. They might throw in some DFS stuff, maybe try DFS, but not nope. Season long, my leagues are done, and I'm glad because this was it was a fun year, but also very stressful. So yeah, it needed we need a break.
Yeah, and Week 18, I mean, look, and what used to be Week 17, if your championship round is in the final week, if you're the commissioner, you should change it. And if you're not the commissioner, you should tell the commissioner to change it because it's just as much of a mess as COVID was this year. That's how the last week of the year is every year. But Aaron Rodgers might not play, so you're going to tell some guy in the championship who has Aaron Rodgers he can't have his top quarterback for the championship match. It's and it happens every year where some top team, Patrick Mahomes, may only play a half. If the Chiefs have a 20-point lead at halftime against Denver, not going to play in the second half. I mean, you just can't predict these things, and so. I don't like it, and I really fantasy ought to end the week before the end of the season. I feel that way for baseball and basketball too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I mean, I can't argue with it because it's just it'd be like, oh, normally it doesn't matter, but if you're the guy that gets messed over by it, then you're going to be griping. So it's like rather than have that potential controversy, just end it a week early.
There's enough randomness in fantasy sports. Don't try to introduce more. You don't need that in your life. However, you can play DFS Week 18 and actually throughout the playoffs. This week you have a Saturday slate with the 2 games, the Chiefs and Broncos, followed by Cowboys and Eagles. Again, as we always say, you got to keep an eye on the news. The Eagles have a COVID outbreak. Not sure how many starters Dallas may or may not play. It sounds like they're going to go for it because a win could mean as high as the 2 seed for the Cowboys, and a loss could mean as low as the 4 seed. And so that matters. You don't even know who you're going to play the first weekend, but where it really matters is if you win that wild card weekend, if you're the 2 or the 3 seed, you're getting a home game in the second round versus if you're the 4 seed, you most likely will end up on the road in the second round. And so that's where it really comes into it. Having said that, the main Sunday slate, lots of good games to choose from, Spencer, and you went with the local guy here as your quarterback pick.
Yeah, I'm thinking Taysom has a really big week this week. You know, a lot of Saints fans, I think, are a little, and rightfully so, you know, cautiously optimistic against Atlanta as far as not thinking that they're gonna do super well. But I'm optimistic. I'm very optimistic. I'm thinking the Saints offense has a much improved showing this week. I know they've been stuck in a rut lately, but I'm thinking Taysom blows up this week, really opens it up with his legs, has a big game, hopefully similar to what he did against the Jets. Because Atlanta gave the Saints trouble the first time around, but this time around, the Saints have something to play for. Atlanta doesn't. I know they'd love to spoil our season, but I'm thinking that Taysom's gonna get it done this week in a big way. And then at running back, Devin Singletary, he has a good matchup there. And it's been really, he's been the workhorse, like we mentioned earlier. And I think he's a really nice value there at 6,000, along with Christian Kirk, who's taken over as the top dog with DeAndre Hopkins out there in Arizona. And they still have something to play for, a potential division title. And then Pat Freiermuth at tight end. Steelers theoretically could still make the playoffs. And he's got a good matchup against the Ravens, who have been just dreadful against the pass lately.
Yeah, this second straight week you've picked Christian Kirk, actually. I think he came up with 13.9 points last week. Didn't get in the end zone, but a solid week otherwise. And so maybe you get in the end zone this week, and that becomes a pretty big value. My DFS
good matchup against Seattle. You know, they're gonna the Seattle secondary got torched by freaking Detroit last week. So hopefully Kirk will do even better this week.
Everybody seems to be torching that Seattle defense lately. My DFS picks, Tyler Huntley, again, it didn't have a great week against the Rams, but the Steelers have been susceptible to the mobile quarterback. This is, of course, if Lamar Jackson is still out, and that's to be decided. If Jackson's not playing, though, Huntley is pretty close to an approximation of Lamar Jackson's production, and he's $1,300 less. So I love that. A.J. Dillon of the Packers, again, we don't know. The Packers probably not playing a lot of starters. Aaron Jones going to get a lot of the weekend off. Dillon had a big week last week, even though he's technically the number 2. So love the value there. And then Marquez Callaway, I'm not sure the market has reacted yet to the idea that Callaway has become the Saints' number 1 receiver. He had 97 yards last week. And obviously, even against the Dolphins, he was the only one doing anything with Ian Book at quarterback. He has become the guy, and the number 1 receiver in New Orleans, maybe not worth a ton, but I think it's worth more than 5,000, especially if he should get in the end zone this week. And then Zach Ertz at tight end, again, trying to exploit that Seattle secondary, just like you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hill Callaway's stack could really pay off against the vulnerable Atlanta defense. And then A.J. Dillon, if he can get the start, will should take advantage of Detroit with Aaron Jones likely to be rested some. And then Huntley, I like it. I like all these values here. Might have to. I'm no season-long fantasy to keep up with. Like I said, I'm probably gonna take a stab at some DFS contests because man, they got some tempting stuff here.
I got the guru seal of approval for these values. I'm excited about that.
Oh yeah. I'm all in. Yeah, Huntley too. You have no Lamar. It's him and Taysom are considering that with their mobility, they're like hacks basically. You can hack your lineup with these mobile quarterbacks, so they give you that stable rushing floor.
Yeah, love the rushing floor, absolutely. All right, well, we hope you enjoyed the 2021 fantasy football season. And as Spencer mentioned, it's not over. You can play DFS, and you can play DFS throughout the playoffs. Every week, every day of playoffs, there's going to be a new slate on DraftKings and FanDuel and Super Draft and all that. And so that is a lot of fun. But the 2021 season pretty much over for fantasy. And the 2022 season is going to be here quicker than you know it. We will do a show around the 2022 NFL draft just afterward and talk about, we got the question about Matt Corral earlier, and Breece Hall is another one, a running back out of Iowa State I love. And it just so much with fantasy depends on where they land. If the trying to think of a good, if the Colts draft Breece Hall, which I don't think they would, but he's obviously not starting over Jonathan Taylor. However, if the If the Raiders drafted him, could he start over Josh Jacobs? Sure, he could. Josh Jacobs hasn't lit anybody on fire. I think that could happen. Or if somebody loses a running back in free agency, somebody gets hurt in the preseason. Breece Hall's a name to keep an eye on. So we will talk some draft stuff. But before we go, let's take a real quick look at the 2022 fantasy draft next July, next August, when you're going to be making these picks. Guys who you will be targeting. I don't know if you're going to play 13 leagues again, Spencer. I don't know if you got the energy for that. But if you do, you're going to target these guys in multiple leagues. Who you got?
For now, yeah, a lot can change between now and then, but yeah,
sure.
But yeah, I like. I'm just kind of thinking ahead and just seeing these guys. I think they're all trending in the right direction. Well, the last one is more of a dart throw. We'll get to that. I'm sorry, yeah, Najee and Javonte, I feel like are both guys that are just Najee had a great rookie year, Javonte solid rookie year. And it's going to depend, assuming the offseason goes to plan. Najee, I will say, if Big Ben retires as planned and they can upgrade their quarterback situation, then I'm thinking Najee is a top 3 pick next year because he won't have all the box stacked against him like he did this year. And Javonte, assuming Melvin Gordon walks, I think he'll be a top 10 running back in 22 drafts. Josh Allen I put here because I feel like he's clear-cut the top quarterback because he's the only quarterback that's an elite passer and an elite runner. Kyler Murray's getting there. He might get there next year, but at this point, Allen's the only quarterback I would draft in the 3rd round because with Mahomes, man, I don't trust Mahomes because his running is not as elite as Allen, and his passing is just he's been kind of hit or miss. He had a solid year, but I'm not all in with Mahomes like a lot of people. I'm not trying to slight him, but I feel like Allen from a fantasy perspective is the better option. Then receivers, I'm buying the Amon-Ra hype. I really believe he'll be a strong WR2 next year with WR1 upside. Hopefully they can upgrade the QB. If so, he might legit be a 3rd or 4th round pick there. And then Mike Thomas I'm putting on here because if he can finally get healthy like he claims he's doing right now, rehabbing that ankle, and if he can finally be 100% for next season, then I don't see why he can't get back to the level of production he was at in 2019. Because, he's still in the prime of his career. If his head's in the right space, I think he'll be an amazing value next year for fantasy.
Yeah, the only guy I like of these, the only guy I'll disagree with you a little bit on is St. Brown, just because – Not that I don't like him as a player. I get afraid when guys get real hot at the end of the year that they get overvalued. And now all of a sudden you got to spend a 3rd round pick on the guy when maybe he's a 5th or 6th round type guy. That's the one where I'd be a little bit worried about the value. But certainly if you could get him in the right spot. Love Michael Thomas, Javonte Williams' picks. Najee's interesting. And let's go into this real quick, Spencer. If it's August 1st and you're doing your first fantasy draft for next year, and let's give a clean bill of health to Christian McCaffrey. Let's give a clean bill of health to Derrick Henry. Cooper Kupp is out there. Who is your number 1 pick if you've got the number 1 pick in a fantasy draft for next year?
Oh, it's got to be Jonathan Taylor, I'd say. I would say JT1, JT1, Kupp 2, Henry 3, Najee 4, and Devontae, maybe Devontae 4 and Najee 5. But I think that's the top 5 next year. I think Devontae and Kupp both get drafted in the top 5. I don't think McCaffrey makes it. He's just too injury prone at this point. I still think he'll be a 1st rounder, but probably in the 7 to 12 range. I don't see him getting taken in the top 6.
Yeah, and that's scary with CMC because it's a soft tissue deal. And we've seen it with Julio Jones now. Once that starts to bite you, it's very difficult to get completely over it. It's not to say you can't come back and have a good game here or there, but it's very difficult as you get older and you start to have those hamstring problems to not have it pop up over the course of a season. And so I agree with you. I mean, if I could get CMC toward the end of round 1, I'd probably do it just because the upside is there. But I don't know that I'd take him any higher than that because chances are you're going to lose him for at least a few games. So, and honestly, Carolina's offense is a complete mess right now, as we saw on Sunday at the Superdome. I mean, it's just they don't have a quarterback really. They got 2 bad ones, 3 bad ones, and they, people key on him. He's injury prone. I don't know where you take him. That's an interesting one. So shy away from CMC. Guys, I'm drafting, and I got quite a few. Like I like Lamar Jackson because, again, he didn't have a great season by his standards. And this is kind of how I feel about Josh Allen, too. Like, people look at Josh Allen and say, well, he could have been better. He was still the number 1 quarterback. Lamar Jackson, well, he could have been better. But before he got hurt, he was like the number 4 quarterback. I mean, the guy's still elite. And I think he'll be, again, it's kind of like DFS. You're looking for value. I kind of think he'll be downgraded. And all of a sudden, if you're taking Allen and Mahomes and Murray and Dak and Joe Burrow in front of him, and Lamar's drafted as like the 6th or 7th quarterback, maybe even a little lower than that, throw Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady in there, he could give you top 5 quarterback production for like, as the number 9 or 10 quarterback off the board. So I love the idea of that. Kyle Pitts, I think he's just on an escalator. I think he's going to get better and better and better and better. He didn't catch a lot of touchdowns this year, but that's sometimes can be more of a fluky thing than anything else. And so he's got the upside. We know he's got the body type, and any quarterback's going to love to have that guy. Brandon Ayuk, we talked about. Again, yes, did Debo surpass him as the number 1? He did, but Ayuk was kind of in the doghouse early in the year, and then he popped off a little bit more in the second half of the year. I think he gets buried on some of these draft charts. He's like I saw one mock draft that had him as wide receiver number 35. He's going to finish higher than that if he stays healthy. And so if I could, it's a bit of a dart throw again, but I'll take him late in drafts. Same thing with Ronald Jones. And this is more predicated on the fact that I don't think Ronald Jones is coming back to Tampa Bay next year. I think he kind of got in Bruce Arians' doghouse. But if he lands somewhere like Philadelphia, trying to think where else could use a running back 1. Maybe in Arizona, he surpasses James Conner.
James Conner is a free agent, so that could happen.
So if Ronald Jones ends up somewhere being the number 1, the guy's super talented. And then another guy like David Montgomery, I don't think he gets the bill as if he stays healthy, that guy's a running back number 1 in my mind. And he's not getting, in mock drafts, not getting listed as that. And another guy I didn't really have room for on here was Hunter Renfrow. I just think he's become, one of these solid slot guys who's going to be around forever and ever and ever. And he's listed in mock drafts as like the wide receiver 23, 24 next year. I think he's a wide receiver 2, and you can pencil him in as a wide receiver 2 for the next 5 years.
True, man, that's a hot take. I mean, he could. Yeah, he could. I'm just
it's
hard to trust the Raiders, man. It's hard to trust the Raiders, but yeah, he might be able to do it. And it'll be interesting. I think he'll be if they keep Carr next year. Yeah, but if they switch quarterbacks, which they might, then that could throw the whole thing off.
No, and that's true. And listen, all of this depends on. I'm not drafting Ronald Jones if he goes to New England and he's part of another 3-headed committee.
Yeah.
I'm not drafting him if he stays in Tampa Bay behind Leonard Fournette. I'm not drafting Hunter Renfrow if the Raiders dump Derek Carr for some reason and Sam Howell out of North Carolina is their rookie starter. Like, I don't know. I still might if it was late enough, just because Renfro's like a security blanket type guy. But I don't like it. A lot of this, yes, is depend on the circumstance.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it'll be interesting to see how this all goes with the draft and such, and coaching changes, like with the Montgomery. Hopefully, they get Nagy out of there and bring in a coach that they can, call the plays better, and then maybe Justin Fields could pop off as well.
Yeah. By the way, latest rumor today is that Jim Harbaugh is ready to leave Michigan and go back to the NFL. That would be super interesting to see whether he's the target for the Bears, whether he's the target for the Raiders because he was the quarterback's coach and knows Mark Davis in Las Vegas. And, maybe listen, when he was the 49ers coach, they got good quarterback play out of Colin Kaepernick and a couple of other guys.
And Alex Smith.
Yeah, Alex Smith. Those were Alex Smith's best years. Colin Kaepernick led the 49ers to a Super Bowl. Like, Jim Harbaugh can coach quarterbacks. He was a quarterback, obviously. And we've seen it. Listen, his Michigan tenure has been up and down, but the guy can coach. He was a good coach in San Francisco. I would really like that for Derek Carr if he was in Vegas. I would like that for Justin Fields if he went to Chicago. And so
Jacksonville should get him. That could get Trevor Lawrence, right?
I would like that for Trevor Lawrence. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So And so if Jim Harbaugh does go back to the NFL, that's another one where it's kind of a game changer for that franchise. And I think you upgrade the quarterback in that situation, and depending on the receivers, maybe upgrade them too. So long way to go before 2022, but we do appreciate everyone being with us throughout the 2021 season. Spencer, give us your final thoughts on Week 17 and on the 2021 fantasy football season.
For sure, yeah, it was a fun one, albeit with the craziness. So appreciate everyone that stuck around with us through it all. I feel like it was worth it at the end of the day. It was wild, but it was still a good time, still fun to go live and write and talk about it each week. And so yeah, it was great. Week 17 it was an air raid, thankfully. A lot of big points put up, so that was cool to see. It wasn't a big defensive struggle week, which a lot of times can happen late in the year like this with the weather getting cold across the country. But luckily, it wasn't too bad. At the solid weather and great performances for the most part. And so yeah, this 21 season, it was one like any other. We got through it though, and let's just enjoy the real life playoffs. That's usually what I do. I kind of take a step back, enjoy the real life playoffs, and we'll be ready for next year, even stronger. 2022 we'll have, I'm sure we'll be, like you said, have shows where we talk about the free agency, the draft, and all that. So we'll be extra prepared for those 2022 drafts, and hopefully we'll have another great year. Less COVID. Let's keep our fingers crossed.
Oh, knock on wood on that, man. Look, I cannot wait until it's like 4th of July weekend, maybe the next week, and we unveil the Gurus rankings for 2022. We're ready to go.
Oh, yeah.
But in the meantime, by the way, we've got fantasy baseball season. Hopefully the lockout ends and we get some free agent movement and all of that. We got some roster set, say by the month of March, and we can do some fantasy baseball draft talk, and fantasy basketball, of course, going on. Anything else, any requests, leave them in the comments. Fantasy soccer, fantasy hockey, fantasy auto racing, golf is
NASCAR. NASCAR starts next month.
Yeah, so we will cover it all. May not be back with you every single week on the Fantasy Roundup, but we'll let you know the schedule. We will be back on Thursday here on bet.nola.com with At the Book. And as we have Fantasy Roundup shows, we'll be sure to announce them to you there and on the website, bet.nola.com. So until next time, that's Spencer the Guru Urquhart. This has been the Fantasy Roundup on bet.nola.com. I'm Zach Ewing. Have a good one, everybody.